Think about it. What would you do if you had a bad run of luck? The chances are that you'd end up turning to government agencies for a bit of help.
We're very lucky to have a welfare state, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate it.
My husband is disabled. Without the benefit system, we would have found things very difficult.
Here in the UK, millions of us need to ask for help every year in the form of benefits, legal aid and healthcare. But there are some people who are out there to cheat the system out of as much as they can.
Benefit cheats are criminals and they should be treated accordingly.
How are these people managing to get away with this?
But those people who are trying to get rich from the public purse are now being sniffed out by investigators who want to make sure that as much money as possible is available to those who need it. This is the world of saints and scroungers.
Coming up, the Scroungers out to beat the system. A single mum on benefits with hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank.
Rashpal had just over £270,000 in her bank. A lot of the money seemed to be going towards building up a property portfolio, both here in the UK and abroad.
A fraudster on disability benefits who's been lying about his condition for over 10 years.
You would expect that that level of activity could trigger off an angina attack and, in the worst case, cause a heart attack.
And we meet someone who rightly deserves a helping hand. A young man trying to pull his life together after battling with drink and drugs.
It just felt absolutely unreal. I felt as if, how can I possibly carry on? How can I pick this up? And there was no way I could see of getting any help, of going anywhere in life.
Now, we all need a roof over our heads, and while many of us are lucky enough to own our own homes, there are some people who need help paying the rent. If it's the council that's providing that help, though, you've got to be honest with them.
In Sandwell in the West Midlands, the drive to clamp down on housing benefit cheats comes from the very top.
We have a zero tolerance approach to fraud. For many people in Sandwell who don't claim what they're entitled to, that we help them to get what they are. But for those people who commit tenancy fraud, I'm interested in making sure that all of those issues are dealt with.
The council's fraud team regularly scrutinises benefit claims in proactive initiatives, and it was during one of these exercises they came across a very unusual case. Meet 45-year-old Rashpal Kaur, a single mother living on income support and receiving housing and council tax benefit from Sandwell Metropolitan Borough Council. She appeared to be the kind of person that taxpayers should be giving a helping hand to.
Rashpal had been claiming benefits since 1995. She was claiming as a single unemployed mother with one child. On the forms completed for the council for housing benefit, Rashpal had stated that she wasn't related to the landlords in any way, and neither were her children.
Between 2003 and 2007, Rashpal Kaur received nearly £25,000 in housing benefit. Nothing seemed to be wrong with her claim until fraud investigators launched a specific drive into a type of benefit payment that she was being given. Ian Scarrett was in charge of the team that looked into her case.
We'd identified a couple of cases where landlords were related to tenants and that hadn't been declared. What we thought we would do would be to carry out a fraud drive to look at people who may have been related to the landlord in some way.
After trawling through housing benefits files looking for signs of unusual tenancy agreements, Rashpal pinged up on the investigators' radar.
Rashpal Kaur was interesting to the council because she'd been at the property for a number of years. The rent was continuing to be the same figure and the landlord had changed in that time and we hadn't had notification of it.
Rashpal was married but separated from her husband. As a single parent, she'd been claiming benefits for over a decade. She'd filled in 2 applications for housing and council tax benefit from 2 addresses in Sandwell, one for St Christopher's Close and the other in Europa Avenue. The investigators' initial inquiries focused on finding out exactly who owned these properties.
We didn't have application forms for Rashpal going back to 95, so we were only able to get evidence from 2003.
And Ian's team didn't waste any time in doing just that. Rashpal had received nearly 25 grand in housing benefit from Sandwell Council since 2003. The investigators needed to make sure that this claim was legit.
Once we looked at Rashpal Kaur and were suspicious about her claim, there were several different checks that we would carry out simultaneously to enable us to make a decision as to whether there was further information we'd need. Things like birth certificates, credit checks, land registry checks.
Investigators were searching for any evidence that might support their hunch that Rashpal's circumstances were not exactly as set out on her claim form, and it wasn't long before they did.
The credit check that we received showed that she'd got some joint credit with a male, which she hadn't declared a male as living at the property, and we checked the male's details at the address, and he came up as showing as having applied for credit in his own right and with a partner, Rashpal.
Hold on! A man was claiming to be living at her address when she was meant to be single. The name on the credit forms was her estranged husband, but he was meant to be out of the picture. Alarm bells started to ring for the investigators, and further checks were needed.
The land registry check showed, for the two addresses, showed people that we were then aware of were either related to Rashpal, either by being the father of her, or the brother of her, or married to her.
Over the years, the two properties that Rashpal had been using to claim benefits from had changed ownership a number of times. Her home at St Christopher's Close was owned individually and jointly by her father and husband, and her home at Europa Avenue was owned at different times by her father and brother and her father and husband.
It was time for investigators to do what they do best, dig a bit deeper.
We carried out some checks, birth certificate checks, firstly on Rashpal, and that showed details of her parents. That was interesting to us because the father was regularly the landlord or the owner of the property that she was living in, or the two properties that she was living in. Further checks showed that a second owner or joint owner of the property was her husband, and we were able to confirm that it was her husband by getting a marriage certificate which showed those details.
So it turns out that Rashpal's landlord is in fact her dad. No, hold on, it's her brother. No, it's her husband. I've heard of married couples having set-tos, but charging your wife rent, well, that's harsh.
Rashpal's claims that her husband was not involved in her life anymore now looked ridiculous. Investigators suspected that she'd given nearly £25,000 of housing benefit money directly to her family. If true, she could potentially be making a fraudulent claim to the council. The fraud team decided it was time to ask her to come in for an interview under caution.
We sent her out 3 interview requests and she didn't attend any of them. Once Rashpal didn't attend the interview, it gave us no option, as far as we were concerned, as to find out where that money was going, whether it was properly being used for rent. And the only way we could do that would be to check the bank account that we were paying the money to see what was happening to it.
Ian's team used their authorised powers to carry out a detailed examination of Rashpal's bank records.
Normally, we would expect to see the money coming in from the council the one day, and perhaps a few days later, that money, the same amount, going out to the landlord. That would be what we would expect to see. With Rashpal, we saw the money going into her account, and then it would sit in the account and be used for general day-to-day expenses. On the face of the bank statements, it appeared that there was no rent being paid.
No rent at all? So nearly £25,000 of taxpayers' money she was getting to keep a roof over her head was being spent on everything else but. So where was it going? with Rashpal refusing to answer any questions. Investigators kept digging into her financial affairs and made a shocking discovery.
We were aware of one bank account, which is where we paid our rent to Rashpal. When we contacted that bank, they advised us there was a number of other bank accounts which we were unaware of.
A single mum on benefits with secret bank accounts. It looked like investigators had unearthed a very sophisticated fraud. But what was going on? Ian's team started the mammoth task of gathering information about where the money in Rashpal's accounts was coming from and what else she was doing.
We found that Rashpal had another 8 accounts, which she hadn't declared to us at all. And these all had money running through them.
8 bank accounts. Who has 8 bank accounts? Rashpal had been given over £25,000 from the council, but had any of this money been siphoned off into the other accounts? It was a confusing picture of deposits and withdrawals.
We also found that Rashpal's husband's wages were being paid directly into one of Rashpal's accounts, which obviously is not what you would expect from a supposed ex-husband.
It certainly wasn't. But the money transfers between the couple were almost insignificant compared to money circulating in some of Rashpal's other accounts. As Ian and his team looked more closely at her banking, the sums of money involved were staggering. What was she doing with the cash? And where was the £25,000 the council had given to her in housing benefit?
I mean, none of this money was declared, you know. She claimed not to have anything.
As we'll see later, Rashpal was very naughty indeed. For now, it's farewell to the fraudsters that are trying to rip off our system and hello to those who we call our saints. People who do everything to make sure that folk who genuinely require help but who are too proud or don't know how to help themselves get what they need.
Do you remember being young? I think I do. It's a little while ago now. What I remember is that there's a huge pressure to fit in. Sometimes that pressure can make you do things which make you a danger to yourself and to those around you. What you need sometimes is help and guidance to get away from the wrong crowd and fit in with the right crowd.
After problems with drink and drugs, Shane blankly found himself homeless and with no hope, aged just 19.
I found that I don't know where my next meal's coming from. I don't know where I'm going to sleep that night. It felt quite hard. I felt like I've lost everything. I felt as if I was going nowhere. The main thing going through my head was I was scared because there was no future.
Shane came from a broken home and had opted to live with his father and brother after his parents had separated. I've come to meet him to find out how someone so young could end up in such a terrifying situation.
So roughly what sort of age would you pinpoint where you kind of left the path of acceptable behaviour, if you like?
It's like 13, 14. It would have been like the summer holidays going up to year 10 doing GCSEs. I got into the wrong crowds. It was just started off as a bit of drinking, I suppose. And then a little bit of kind of light drugs come along.
And how are things going at school then, after that?
School took a bit of a turn, because I was turning up hungover, or I was getting high in the middle of the day, you know, so it kind of come to the point where I was being put in isolation at school. I was being taken out of the lessons. They didn't want me there. I was being too much of a distraction.
So you're kind of trying to prove yourself to the group of people you're with.
Yeah.
What kind of behaviour went with that then? What other stuff were you getting up to?
I just wanted to rebel. Self-destruct, that was it. The more people kind of helped me out or offered help, the more I pushed away. I still to this day don't know what it was. It was just, there was something about me saying, no, I don't want to do what they're telling me.
Shane started to experiment with harder drugs, and it wasn't long before his erratic behaviour took its toll on his dad, with whom he was living at the time.
One night, yeah, I was chilling out. I was bored at home. I'd found my brother's car keys.
like an idiot, I decided to go out and take his car. I went for a spin. I've been drinking. I took a little bit of drugs. It wasn't much for me, you know. It was kind of like what I'd class as an average night. I enjoyed myself, I suppose. That was the kind of idea, but it soon turned into a disaster when I crashed it. When my parents found out that night, my dad just, that was it. It was the final straw for him. He threw me out there and then.
Shane's mum took him in, but it was a struggle for him to keep off the drugs.
So you're with your mum?
Yeah.
Is she more tolerant of what you're up to? Is she letting you drink and take drugs?
She pretty much made me go cold turkey. It came to the point, the first couple of weeks I was locked in. I wasn't allowed out, but as time went on, she gave me a little bit more freedom, and I think in that freedom she didn't realise exactly what I was doing in my spare time. I was getting the bus back to see mates, and I was going back to drinking and doing drugs.
OK, so you may be thinking at this point, Shane is just trouble. Eventually his mum decided to kick him out. Like many in his situation, he ended up living in hostels. Finally, he managed to get a flat of his own from the council and was working in a warehouse to try and make ends meet. But living an isolated life and with no parents to look out for him, his previous problems with substance abuse came back to haunt him.
It was really good, my job, but I turned to drink because it was something to relax me after a hard day, you know. But with me previously having drink problems anyway, you know, it soon crept up and started to become a problem. And I soon found that I needed something to pick me up. That's when the drugs started coming in.
Living by himself clearly wasn't doing this troubled young fella any favours, and left to his own devices, his drug use spiralled out of control.
It come to the point where I was 2 weeks inside my flat, and first few days I phoned up work, told them I can't make it, and then it felt too much to even phone work. It got to the point where I could not even pick up the phone.
Shane lost his job, and without a steady income, his bills started to pile up. His issues with drink and drugs burnt his bridges with those who loved him, and this young man lost the support network we all need to get on in the world.
I felt really down because of everything I'd lost. And then it gets a letter through from my housing association saying they're putting in for an eviction notice. And that's when things really started to drop. It got to the point where I felt that down that I didn't see a life ahead of me, you know.
The housing association wanted Shane out, but they also recognised he was a young man that needed help. So they arranged for Helen Parkin, a family employment coach, to help him get out of the desperate situation he was in.
At the time that I started working with him, he was facing eviction, he had the court order, he couldn't face the court case, he had no criteria with which to fight the court case, and this pile of debts, and he really just couldn't see a way out of the situation.
I mean, at that point, if you can't see a way forward, literally you're talking about going back to hostels again, a life of homelessness if you get that eviction through.
Yeah, and I didn't want to, in any way, shape or form. Any sort of hostel.
Tell me a bit more about Helen.
Yeah, Helen was referred on to me by the Housing Association. She's from a local training programme. She's like a family liaison. She helps with all sorts of areas, you know, drink, drugs, anxiety, depression.
Helen was Shane's only hope. He'd been evicted, but she pointed him in the direction of a charity that could potentially help with accommodation and work.
I thought of a local organisation, a local charity that I had some meetings with who do take in the homeless. This organisation is all about promoting work. It's not about providing anything for free.
A sense of purpose was exactly what Shane needed, but he'd have to be prepared to give up his job seekers allowance and come off drink and drugs in order to be considered for one of the charity's programmes. Got
in touch with them, found out the referral process, went along and spent a a lengthy Friday afternoon with Shane, telling them all about the organisation, going through the referral process, wrote the referral form for him, which he then signed.
But would Shane be successful in his application to Emmaus? We'll find out later.
Emmaus meant a lot to me. You know, it was sort of this idea of, wow, I've actually got somewhere to go. These guys are going to give me a chance in life. And yeah, I was hoping and praying that, you know, that they would accept me, that they would take me on.
Now, from those in need of help to those who abuse the very same system to claim money to which they're not entitled.
Here in the UK, the Department for Work and Pensions has a safety net in place to help those who are genuinely diagnosed with an illness or disability. You could end up with a blue badge to help you get around, a much needed cash injection or even home help, and that's only fair. But what isn't fair is when some people try to use that safety net to systematically scam you and me, the taxpayer.
Now, it is just a very tiny percentage of disability claimants who cheat the system, but the money they fraudulently claim can add up. When Edward Kavanagh was diagnosed with sciatica and angina in 1992, it seemed that his life would change forever. He told the benefit authorities he couldn't walk unaided and suffered excruciating pain when he did. He also claimed that he needed help to get in and out of bed, on and off the toilet, and to hold a kettle to make a cup of tea.
Sciatica is a condition of the musculoskeletal system characterised by pain in the lower back, and often it radiates into the leg. Someone suffering from sciatica would be expected to have restricted movement as a result of pain especially, or even as a result of weakness if the condition was a severe one. Angina is a sign of cardiovascular disease. I would expect someone with uncontrolled angina especially to avoid strenuous exercise.
Edward's condition was so severe that he was assessed as being incapable of working. He received just over £108 in incapacity benefit and £100 disability living allowance every week.
Disability benefits are vital in allowing a person to perform normal functional tasks of daily living, walking and care. If they were not available, that person would be left in a situation where they could not cope and couldn't look after themselves on the most basic level, being unable to prepare a meal, go to the toilet and walk. That safety net is very important.
Kavanagh was getting a helping hand from the state, but was he as fragile as he claimed to be? Someone didn't think so and phoned the benefit fraud hotline to say he was a bit more active than he was making out. At the end of 2011 and start of 2012, fraud officers mounted a surveillance operation to look into this allegation. Dr. Javeed Abdelmonaim is an independent medical expert with experience treating people who have Edward's condition. We asked him to examine the footage the investigators got hold of.
He continues to groom the dogs. He bends down to the dogs with normal speed, freely. He shows no signs of pain on his face. He's using all four limbs, doesn't have a limp, and at no point uses any walking sticks or any mobility aid.
And according to what he wrote on his claim form, he shouldn't be able to make it to the end of the street without a walking stick, let alone go running with his dogs. He's in slightly better shape than me.
He's happy to trot. He actually goes at a slightly faster speed here, almost a gentle jog, a short distance with the two dogs on a leash. For example, if he had uncontrolled angina, you would expect that that level of activity could trigger off an angina attack and in the worst case, cause a heart attack.
But could the video footage provide evidence that would affect Edward's claim?
I noticed these films are actually taken around New Year, just after the New Year. He's wearing a heavy coat, he's out in the cold. Some people's anginas are actually triggered by cold. And so you could construe that if he had such a severe angina that was causing disability, that he'd find it difficult to walk two large dogs undertaking strenuous exercise out in the very cold weather.
It was clear from the video footage that Edward Kavanagh was not as disabled as he claimed to be. But in the tip-off to the benefit fraud hotline, the caller also claimed that he had a job, working, when he'd claimed he was unable to work. When the fraud team carried out financial checks and conducted further surveillance, they found that he was using his mobility vehicle, bought with his benefits, to work as a door-to-door finance collector twice a week. It turns out that his job required Edward to do quite a bit of walking, as he visited clients' houses across the Liverpool area. When fraud investigators brought Edward in for interview, they offered to show him their video evidence, but he didn't want to see himself on camera and admitted that he'd been working since 2001. Edward Kavanagh fraudulently claimed almost £99,000 in incapacity benefits and disability living allowance. In April 2013, he pleaded guilty to failing to inform the Department of Work and Pensions of a change in his circumstances, and he was sentenced to 8 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. He was also ordered to do 120 hours unpaid work. The benefits authorities are trying to recover the money he stole from the taxpayer, and they've also reclassified him as being capable of work. So now this fraudster has to go out and earn an honest living. It's time to leave the deceitful world of fakes and fraudsters and turn our attention to the people that really need the help of the welfare state. Shane Blankley's life had disintegrated due to substance abuse, and at the age of 22 faced the prospect of being homeless. He'd lost his flat and his job, and his future depended on whether or not he was going to be accepted into one of the communities set up by a charity called Emmaus.
We work with people who have been formerly homeless, and we provide them with a community home to live in and a social enterprise to work in. When people come to us, we will find a skill that they want to work on or a job that they're particularly interested in.
But he was far from sure he'd get offered a place with his checkered past of addictions.
The general criteria is that somebody who comes to us is, first of all, wanting to change around their life and the circumstances they found themselves in. They want to and are able to do some work, no matter how basic that might be. And they're prepared to come off drugs and alcohol if they have dependencies.
Shane desperately wanted to get a place on one of the charity's programmes in order to turn his life around. He'd reached rock bottom, and it seemed like a possible way forwards.
While waiting to get accepted into Emmaus, it was hard to cope with, because all your hopes, everything you could possibly think of that is good about life, is riding on one person saying yes or no.
Christine Dallas is the leader for the community in Leicestershire, which considered Shane's application.
We saw great potential in Shane, but what we saw was somebody who wanted to change his life, and that is really important to us. We can only work with people when they want to succeed. We could give him responsibility that would give him something in his life. We could give him his pride back.
Shane finally got the call he'd been waiting for.
When I got accepted, I was over the moon. Felt as if I'd gone from one extreme to the other. Felt as if all of a sudden I'd gone from, oh no, the world is literally coming to an end for me, to being, actually, hold on, they're going to give me a job, they're going to put a roof over my head, they're going to provide me with money, and they're going to provide me with the support I could really need and I could really do with.
The charity provided Shane with living accommodation and gave him a job working in one of its emporiums, which restores donated furniture and then sells it to the public. Matthew Taylor's been working with the charity for over a year. He was given the responsibility of helping Shane to settle in.
When Shane first arrived, Shane was very nervous. He was didn't know the way. I was sort of assigned to Shane, so I showed him around his new room, and broke the ice with a joke, and We had a laugh together.
Oh yeah, thanks for warning me about the stool. Matt's helped me quite a lot since I've been here. Even if it's simple things like waking me up in the morning, banging on my door in the morning to check that I'm up for work. Or just halfway through the day, if he notices that I'm probably just taking a bit of a wander around the shop and not really interacting with customers, he instantly clicks on that there's something not quite right with me, and he'll just pull me straight out of the way, he'll take me into the office, ask me if I'm all right. You're supposed to be looking where you're going.
Having heard Shane's story, I've come to see for myself just how far he's come.
I mean, everything we're looking at here is for sale. This is a working shop.
Yep.
It is a different proposition, isn't it, to any other shop?
Yeah. If you don't talk to the customers, you're potentially throwing away business, because it is a charity, and people do come in just to see what the charity's about. And then they find out like about the lads who work here and that sort of stuff, and then they find out the stories. And a lot of us are open to tell our stories, and that's what brings people back, I think.
One day Shane was on the shop floor and a customer came into the shop and she was very interested in the piano. And I just stood back to watch Shane go to talk to the customer. And he was talking to the customer, and then all of a sudden, this piano's been in like a week, and all I've heard is dump, dump, dump on it. And this beautiful music started coming out of this piano, and it was Shane playing the piano, and the customer was that impressed, she brought the piano there and then.
It's great to see Shane looking genuinely settled, maybe for the first time in his life. It does sound like he has a real knack with the customers as well, but when it comes to playing the piano, well, I could teach him a thing or two.
So that's what I love about them.
Big finish?
Yep.
Here we go. Brilliant. Very nice, I'll take it. So, tell me what happens next for you. Where do you see yourself going if you can plan, 6 months, a year? How far ahead are you looking?
I want to go into youth work, all areas, all aspects. I'd love to go into a bit of probation. I'd like to go into social. I want to try all different areas of it.
So that's work. What do you want for you, in the years to come?
I want to have a stable roof over my head. I want something that I can guarantee is going to be there. I'd like to see a bit of my family more. I'd like to build some bridges. Friends as well, friends especially. I have lost quite a few of them. So yeah, I think it's not just progression in work or any particular area. I think it's just progression in life.
The charity has helped Shane to turn around his life when he was an all-time low, and now his hard work is paying off.
It's not just a roof over your head, it's actually working with others to make the social enterprise a success. And through their work, they will enable us to become financially viable as businesses.
Shane now has big ambitions, and it seems like his new family at the charity have high hopes for him as well.
So, where would you put Shane right now? What position is he in?
We've seen a massive difference in Shane. As you can see in Shane, he interacts brilliantly with the other companions. They mentor him, they look after him, and he responds really well to that. Shane's definitely not at the end of his journey, but he is on his way.
What is it that's brought about that change, though?
What really works for Shane is the fact that he now has some structure in his life. He knows where he wants to go. He knows what he needs to do to get there. He wants to be a youth counsellor, and what we have done is we've spoken to our senior schools, and because of Shane's background, he's now able to go in and talk to the children, the students that are at risk of going down perhaps drugs and alcohol. But what really works as well for Shane is that Shane goes in with his shirt and his tie, and the students call him sir. And that really works. It helps Shane's confidence.
It's amazing how I have changed. I think I look back on me and how I was. I was that screwed up and messed up at the time that any loss of anything was just, it just knocked me down straight away. And then I look at me now and you can knock me down couple of times, and I'll keep getting back up. I've got that support network around me. I've got people there for me.
And Shane lived happily ever after. If only it was that simple. The reality is, of course, that Shane's got a lot of hard work to do to get his life back on track after a pretty shaky start. But in Emmaus, at least, he's got a firm foundation and a new sense of purpose, because at last, he's found somewhere where he truly fits in.
Time now to go back to the devious world of money-grabbing scroungers. The fraud team at Sandwell Metropolitan Borough Council is investigating the case of single mother Rashpal Kaur, who they suspect is cheating the system and paying her housing benefit directly to family members. In the course of their inquiries, officers discovered that despite being a single mum on benefits, Rashpal had access to huge amounts of cash in a number of different bank accounts.
Where you've got serious cases of deliberate fraud, clearly benefits are not then paid when it's been found that they're not entitled to those benefits. But the case is then has to be put together to bring the prosecution.
Steve took the decision to stop Rashpal's benefits, but the investigators still had a lot of work to do to get to the bottom of what was going on. She'd been given nearly £25,000 in housing benefits between 2003 and 2007, and the fraud team had to find out where this money had gone.
This spreadsheet shows the various accounts that Rashpal had that were undeclared to the council, and over a 6-year period we can show that Rashpal had just over £270,000 in these bank accounts.
Well, it seems Rashpal is doing very well for herself. And who can blame her? She's clearly a shrewd investor. The only slight fly in the ointment is the fact that not all of the money is hers. In fact, there were so many accounts that the investigators had a real job trying to track it down. All 270,000 of it.
Investigators had to go through a painstaking process of tracking and deciphering what was behind Rashpal's various bank transactions. But they did begin to notice a pattern.
The money that was in the accounts was being paid out in quite big sums. Some of the sums were traced to property companies or solicitors who dealt with property sales, both in this country and abroad. Our investigation showed that there was a lot of links to Southampton area for property, but also there was property developers in Dubai who she was making payments to.
Rashpal was potentially using British taxpayers' money to buy property by the seaside and in the Middle East. After the fraud team examined bank records that connected Rashpal with 3 properties in Southampton, they investigated who was living at these addresses and uncovered a vital piece of evidence.
There was an address in Southampton, West End Road, where there was a claim made from somebody to get help with rent from Southampton Council. On that claim, they'd noted that the landlord was Rashpal Kaur.
But that wasn't all.
A phone number that could be used for contact was the phone number that we held for Rashpal Kaur.
So, in Sandwell, Rashpal was getting benefits for being a single mum. In Southampton, she was being paid taxpayers' money as a landlord. And if that wasn't bad enough, Ian's team was about to discover even more potential abuses of the system.
She made an application for carer's allowance for her mother, stating that she was looking after her mum 35 hours a week. Rashpal stated on the application form for carer's allowance that she wasn't working. We didn't trust that to be correct, so we did some checking. We found out that she was working full-time at a local call centre.
It was a barefaced lie. And in the course of their investigation, the fraud team also discovered that Rashpal may have fraudulently completed a housing benefit claim for a friend and then lied to the authorities about that as well.
Just looks like she's trying to get around the benefit system and use a different benefit to get her the payments that she obviously thinks she deserves.
Ian had more offences to add to the list of allegations against Rashpal, but what he had to prove was how she'd spent the £25,000 of housing money the council had given to her between 2003 and 2007.
One of the things that we noticed with Rashpal was in 2006 she'd taken out some insurance policies for her and her husband, in which they were both the recipient of the money should the other die. Effectively, Rashpal was laundering this money, taking the money that she'd received criminally and turning it into cleaner money.
It was the last piece of the jigsaw. Investigators also found evidence that Rashpal had used taxpayers' money for private school fees, private number plates and various expenses around the home.
Rashpal was charged with 22 counts, variously benefit fraud, perverting the course of justice, about another benefit fraud case that had been brought, and money laundering.
She was charged with perverting the course of justice because investigators believed she'd made a witness retract their statement which incriminated Rashpal in a fraudulent claim involving her friend. After investing thousands of man-hours into the case, Ian's team finally put Rashpal in front of a judge and jury on the 5th of October 2012. No one else in her family was charged with any offences.
Rashpal appeared at Wolverhampton Crown Court and pleaded not guilty to all the offences and charges that had been put to her. This meant that we had to have a trial. That trial lasted 12 days, which is as long as a trial for benefit fraud has ever taken in my knowledge.
Rashpal may have put up a long fight, but the jury simply didn't believe her and found her guilty of all charges.
And at the end of the trial, the judge said it was the most comprehensive benefit fraud that he'd seen, and she was sentenced to 32 months in prison.
Rashpal Kaur is clearly a calculating criminal. She had a significant amount of money, far more money than the vast majority of residents of Sandwell could ever hope to have. She used those benefits to supplement that money, to invest in property to make more money. Her motives were pure greed.
It was a great result for the Sandwell fraud team and taxpayers who'll be getting their money back and any money Rashpal made as a result of her fraudulent acts.
Rashpal was convicted of fraudulently claiming in excess of £28,000. We aim to recover that, and in fact, using the Proceeds of Crime Act, we aim to recover in excess of £200,000 from her.
200 grand is big money. Rashpal's property empire is huge, and if she can't prove that it's from legitimate income, it will be confiscated.
So, cash-rich Mrs. Kaur finally got what was coming to her, a very lengthy sentence. She was held to account for a very complex and dodgy set of accounts.